From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thank you very much for tuning in. But before we get to our issues, we all want to share some thoughts on the namesake of this show. So, Pat, why don't you start us off?
My old White House colleague, John McLaughlin, launched this in the second year of the Reagan White House, and it lasted all the way through to the end of the Obama administration. I'm delighted it's been revived and back, and somewhere John is looking down and smiling.
Good.
He took a lot of hits for ushering in the era of combative talk, and he was considered part of the problem of the lack of civility in political conversation. I like to think now that we're part of the solution. I always come to this show, I learn something from Pat. Pat was Trump before Trump in terms of the issues that he embraced, and so I'm delighted to be back as well and share my reporting and my views.
Clarence.
Well, I just want to say that I got some real respect in my house finally when Mad Magazine lampooned all of us. And our son was in the 5th grade, and suddenly he was the hit of the whole school. I mean, it shows you that John's appeal just crossed generations and across all kinds of people in this country, and I really miss him.
Evan, great to have you with us.
Great to be here. And I think from today's prism, we can only consider what may have been combative debate previously, very civilized discussion now, and I agree.
Let's not get carried away with that.
That's right. I'm happy to see the show back on the air.
And obviously, no one can replace John McLaughlin, but the passion I think that we all have in the country at the moment where there's so much division is to have the debate and to have those exchange of viewpoints, but at the same time in a position of mutual respect, and hopefully we can match that to the 21st century for the rest of the century going forwards. Anyway, issue 1, Bannon's revenge.
He's a friend of mine, and he's very committed to getting things passed. But you had a few people that really disappointed us. They really, really disappointed us. So I can understand fully how Steve Bannon feels.
In Washington, 3 months can change everything. Last October, witnessing the failure of Senate Republicans to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, Mr. Trump took solace in his former advisor, Steve Bannon's aggressive condemnations of establishment Republicans in Congress. But that was before Roy Moore, tax reform, and this week. After all, this week, Washington was rocked by excerpts from journalist Michael Wolff's new book, Fire and Fury, Inside the Trump White House. The book suggests Mr. Bannon told Mr. Wolff that President Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., was quote-unquote treasonous for meeting with a Russian lawyer at Trump Tower in June 2016. Mr. Wolff also claims Mr. Bannon told him that the FBI are, quote, going to crack Don Jr. like an egg on national TV, end quote. In response, President Trump declared, quote, Steve Bannon has nothing to do with me or my presidency. When he was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind, end quote. The president is now threatening legal action against both Mr. Bannon and Mr. Wolff. Pat, do you think that the challenge here to Mr. Trump from Mr. Bannon is going to affect the president's base going forward?
No, the base belongs to Donald Trump. I will say that Bannon was partly responsible for the economic nationalist aspect, for the America First aspect, for those issues that added to the regular Republican base and enabled Trump to win. I think he did a great job during the campaign, but there's no doubt when you make statements like that, it's extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside the church, there is no salvation. And right now, Bannon is outside the church, and I think he's got to get back into it, but the base belongs to the Donald.
Right. It's a stunning act of betrayal, and I think the dream that Bannon had of fielding these far-right, alt-right, nationalist candidates throughout the country challenging Republicans in primaries, I think that dream died with this book. You see the candidates that he's been backing, they're separating himself from him. So I think he's really toxic for the moment. I think he goes off into the galaxy of the formerly famous who are now irrelevant, joining Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann in that world.
Evan, one of the things that's really, interesting with the Trump administration is the media narrative. And suddenly we find someone who has long been the most fervent, perhaps, media interlink for President Trump in this kind of position. I mean, do you think this will affect that side of things?
I do think it may, but I think what's more interesting here is that Donald Trump has a cult of personality within this alt-right white nationalist base that I think, as Pat said, belongs to him, not to Bannon. So I think that continues. I do think this is going to be demoralizing for the base in some respects, and that can have an impact going forward. I don't think, though, we've heard the last of Steve Bannon. I think he'll be around, especially as the investigation into the White House continues with Mueller. Bannon's stock, I think, will rise again.
I think Bannon's in for a humbling. He's already getting it, frankly. He is not the center attraction. Donald Trump is. People in the base, a lot of them have been interviewed by reporters and didn't even know who Steve Bannon was or is, which is amazing to us because we're just political junkies following this every day. But the base, they all know who Donald Trump is. Steve Bannon is the impresario behind the scenes, but he's already divided his own support in the Mercer family, as we've seen, which is funding Breitbart. Without them, Breitbart is in danger of collapse. Breitbart's audience is already split between those who are with him and who aren't.
This base is larger than the alt-right.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump's got about 35% of the country, it was the lowest, probably 80% of the Republican Party. You got a Republican Party and a populist conservatives and the traditional conservatives, and the real winning thing is to bring them together like they did in the tax bill.
Yes, but
Bannon represents the, it's not the alt-right, it's the populist right, I think it represents.
Well, I would differ. Look, Bannon doesn't represent the entire Republican base. He doesn't even represent the entire Trump base. But Bannon's portion of the base is, as you say, the populist base. I would say it includes also the white nationalist part, and that's it.
But the positive sides, from my point of view, of Bannonism was he wanted to raise taxes on the rich. He did not support the tax plan that, as it was conceived, which basically rewards the rich. He wanted to reach out to Democrat working people, and those aspects he takes with him. And I don't know that Trump is now captured by the globalists.
All right, let's go to a good exit question. On a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being absolute metaphysical certainty, and 1 being the potential of escaping the event horizon of a black hole, how likely is it that Trump will forgive Bannon? 1 to 100.
I think there's a 50% chance that Bannon will be back in the fold by, I would say, after 2018.
Eleanor.
If Trump runs into more political problems, he'll be picking up the phone.
What's the number?
One of those mornings, I would say 49.
Evan?
I say 60% that he'll be back in the fold to some degree.
Yeah, to some degree. I'd say 50%. Frankly, that's happened before with Jeff Sessions. They've been on the ins and the outs, and it's going to happen with Bannon as well.
I think he's Trump's brain, so I'm 75. Issue 2, the nuclear button.
I think the president and the people of this country should be concerned about the mental fitness of the leader of North Korea. He's made repeated threats. He's tested missiles time and time again for years. And this is a president who's not going to cower down and is not going to be weak and is going to make sure that he does what he's promised to do, and that's stand up and protect the American people.
On Tuesday, President Trump responded to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's threat that he controls his nation's nuclear weapons from his desk in Pyongyang. Speaking on Twitter, Mr. Trump commented, quote, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works, end quote. Question, Pat, how close are we to nuclear war, or conventional war for that matter?
I don't think we're close to war for this reason. There are 200,000 American dependents in South Korea, as well as the 28,000 troops. Nobody is bringing them out. North Korea is going to meet with
Lindsey
South Korea.
Graham wants them out.
Well, I don't think they ought to do it. I mean, that would be, and also the United States isn't moving nuclear weapons in there. The talk may be toxic and very close to war. The actions are not. I can't believe a war is in the interest of South Korea, North Korea, Japan, anyone.
Yeah. Actually, there was big news this week because Kim Jong-un actually reached out to the South Korean president, who is the son of North Korean refugees. And that's an opening. And you could say that Trump has kind of forced this situation to break apart. In a positive way, he's gotten Un to step forward. But then to put these tweets out there, to taunt him and mock him. I mean, we're dealing with two personalities, neither of whom is particularly stable. I don't think either side wants war, but I think the possibility of stumbling into something simply because of these personal grievances back and forth, the president is playing with fire here.
Evan, your former employer, or one of your former employers, has assessed that Kim Jong-un is probably rational. I mean, how do you see this playing out? What do you think about the President Trump's strategy?
Well, I do think Kim Jong-un is rational, and because of that, I think he'll continue to pursue nuclear weapons, because he looks around the world and sees that when leaders give up their nuclear prowess or potential nuclear prowess, they end up in compromising positions or weak positions with adversarial Western forces. So he'll continue to pursue them. I don't think we're close to war, however, but I think the key remains China and Russia. They continue to supply energy to North Korea. If we're not willing to get tough on China and Russia, they're not going to get tough on North Korea.
Yeah, very quickly, I think that these two guys are like a couple of schoolyard testosterone-fueled kids who are playing what we used to call the dozens years ago with each other, tossing insults. But you notice how they quietly drifted apart, and Kim Jong-un went over and began his negotiations with the South. And Trump, Mr. America First, Donald Trump is perfectly happy to sit over here and let them
there's
do
a red
it.
line here. Look, he has tested this year an ICBM. He's tested a hydrogen bomb, not just an atomic bomb. He's going to keep it up, as Evan said, until he's got the capacity to hit Los Angeles or Seattle. And there's a lot of American military men and others who say he is moving toward a red line. He hasn't crossed it yet. I don't know what exactly do you do. Does the United States live with a nuclear arm?
Let me ask you, I want to challenge Pat on one thing here. Do you think this is the opportunity for national security hawks and individuals such as yourself who've long pushed for the idea of tariffs on trade as a mechanism to pressure China to pressure North Korea more? Are we at that point?
Yeah.
Well, listen, if you get to the point where you're going to, the alternative is going to war,
right,
I would agree with you. But I think that Kim Jong-un is a smart guy. He's driving a wedge between South Korea, which doesn't want a war, and the United States, which doesn't want those missiles armed with nuclear weapons that can hit us.
Right, and that's it's kind of like the double madman theory here, because the two of them are acting nuts like a lot of despots do, but this is calculated, and I think they're going to reach a point where you have well, it's not going. North Korea doesn't want to cross that red line because they know they're going to be destroyed in about a half hour.
Well, let's have to go to exit question. Let's do an exit question. We're going to come back to this.
Excuse me, I don't know about the calculation on the president's side.
Okay.
He's not always acting in a strategic
question.
way.
Hypothetical scenario: 9 months from now, the U.S. intelligence community tells President Trump that North Korea has achieved a credible intercontinental missile plus nuclear warhead capability on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the beauty of a British accent, and 0 being the ugliness of a British town on a Friday night. How likely is Trump to authorize military action?
War against a nuclear-armed North Korea that's got a missile that will hit the United States? I don't think he will do it. I don't think his military.
What's your number?
I would say less than 1.
Okay.
Yeah. I would hope that General Mattis has put safeguards in place so that President Trump can't give rein to his impulses. I'd say 2, with General Mattis holding the leash.
I hope it's a 3, and also hopeful for Mattis's influence.
I would fully agree with that.
I think it's probably a 5. When we come back, DACA deals and protests in Iran. Also, for some unique content, make sure to follow us on Twitter at McLaughlin Group and visit our website, www.mclaughlin.com.
When I grow up, I want to make cars fly, soaring through the air like a rocket.
We all grow up, but you might say my head's still in the clouds. Because at Coke, my team and I dream up new technologies to make cars more aerodynamic, which improves fuel economy. It's a challenge, but this is what I was born to do.
When I was a freshman in college, I lost my brother Brian to suicide. Brian had been a very successful college student himself who was president of an a cappella group, sports editor of a newspaper, 3.8 GPA at an Ivy League university. And what we learned is that he started experiencing some pretty severe mental health issues in his freshman year of college. He started experiencing depression and hearing voices, some psychosis, and yet he hid it. He hid it from me. He hid it from his friends. He hid it from all of his teachers because he was scared. He was ashamed. He didn't know what this meant. He thought he was the only one who was struggling, and he thought it was his fault. Brian eventually went and sought help in his senior year. The hopelessness and the helplessness that accompanies depression had gotten to him, and had gotten to him so strong that just about a year later, in my freshman year of college, Brian died by suicide.
Issue 3, Donald's DACA deal.
Every senator and congressman will have to make a choice. Do they want to protect American citizens or do they want to protect criminal aliens?
Tough language aside, President Trump says he's open to a deal on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program. Established by President Barack Obama in 2012, DACA has allowed illegal immigrants who entered the United States as minors to avoid deportation. Last year, however, the Trump administration announced an end to DACA, raising the prospect that its beneficiaries will, come much of this year, become subject to deportation. But there's a crucial catch. In return for funding to establish his long-promised wall on the U.S.-Mexican border, the president says he'll consider allowing DACA recipients to remain in the United States. Pat, will and should President Trump agree to a DACA deal with Democrats?
Well, my view is no. But I do think this. I think that Trump will agree to the deal. I don't think he'll get the wall. I think he'll get a security fence on the border and other things, protections like that. And I think the pressure from the public elsewhere on the DACA thing, because it is publicly popular, I think ultimately Trump will concede on that and he will be charged with amnesty.
Yeah, the alt-right or the Bannon base won't like it, but the broad base of Americans will. And the Democrats are under a lot of pressure to get this done because they walked away from attaching it to the end-of-year budget proposals, and they're getting a lot of grief from their base that they weren't tough enough. So I think there's a reasonable deal here. He won't get the wall. He'll get money for border security, and the Democrats have given money for that for years. So there's a deal here.
Yeah, I think there will be a deal, but I think the question is how hard and how long will the fight be? The reality is that Donald Trump and the Republicans are in a position of weakness on this. 2/3 of America support allowing DACA people to remain in the United States, and only about 1/3 of Americans support the wall. I think the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, are going to be smart enough to understand that the president is in a weak position here, and they're going to want this fight, and they're going to want this fight to last a while. Heading into 2018, it's not good for the Republicans.
Clarence, don't you think the president needs some money for the wall, though, to consolidate his base?
Well, he needs, let's say, first of all, the Democrats don't want a wall that is called a wall. If we just don't tell anybody, we'll just call it a security fence, and the Democrats will buy it because they have supported that in the past. Trump's base does not want more DACA folks to get what they would call amnesty, but the president is seeing that this is simply a fairness issue. These folks arrived as children; they were too young to know what was going on, and they've been productive citizens, shouldn't be penalized.
Yeah, their right for them to stay in the country expires in March, so the Democrats can't string that out until November.
I think the best thing would be to string it out. Nobody was going to deport these people first. You go after the criminals, the felons, the others. Get rid of those sanctuary cities and all that.
Is Pat Buchanan an amnesty man now?
No, but I just say in in terms of deportations, you don't go after people who are relatively harmless, who are doing work in the society.
But
you go after the worst first.
That's the Obama administration. The Trump administration, they are going
All
after
right.
people.
Issue 4, Timeo Americae et Dona Ferentes.
The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. It has turned a wealthy country with a rich history and culture into an economically depleted rogue state whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos. The longest suffering victims of Iran's leaders are, in fact, its own people.
Protests erupted across Iran this week as thousands of citizens gave voice to their anger over economic stagnation and absent opportunity. Yet when it comes to US policy debates over how to respond to the protests, attitudes are split. At heart lies the question of how Iranians might receive offers of US support. To render a question from Virgil, beware the Americans, even those bearing gifts? While some, like President Trump, proudly proclaim sympathy and solidarity with the protesters, others worry that good sentiments will render bad effects. Take former Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who referenced an article titled, quote, "How can Trump help Iran's protesters? Be quiet," end quote. Rice and company fear that long-standing mistrust between America and Iran means that any perceived US involvement in the protests will delegitimize those on the streets. Eleanor, who do you think has the best plan here? Team Trump, Team Obama?
There are plenty of liberal columnists who are saying Trump is doing the right thing. He's standing up for the values that we believe in. He's supporting these people. But you can't take it too far, because you then just give the Iranians an opportunity to blame the great Satan for what's happening there. So what he's done so far is okay, but please, no more tweets on that subject.
Even worse would be to build false hopes over there that we're going to come in and give military support to the rebels or dissidents. That is the kind of a trap that Trump could talk himself into.
George H.W. Bush urged the Shia to rise up against Saddam, and then they were slaughtered in 91. I can go back to 1956. I think Radio Free Europe told the Hungarians rise up, and they rose up. Khrushchev sent in the tanks, and we did nothing. Sent Richard Nixon over to the bridge at Andau to greet the refugees pouring out. So I think we ought to stand up, don't do what Obama did, which was nothing. Speak out, speak for the right values.
Obama gave quiet support, and they cracked down
was
anyway.
the problem,
In
it was quiet.
2009, well, we weren't going to send military support.
No, but you
Lebanese
stand up
Hezbollah
for
was
your
some
beliefs.
beneficiaries, though. We have the great political report. Evan, what do you think?
Yeah, we cannot fail to stand up for our core values around the world. And oftentimes that just means speaking on behalf of them. People around the world need to secure their own freedom. We can't intervene, nor should we, in every case, or maybe in many cases. But we cannot fail to speak about our values. Lastly, I would just say that we do need to be prepared, however, to draw a bright line around the defense of basic human rights. We need to let the Iranian regime know that if they're going to slaughter a bunch of people to put down this uprising,
do not cancel.
That's right. That's right.
But do not.
The world is watching, as the president said.
But do not cancel that nuclear deal. And I don't think you impose sanctions on people who are rising up for their economic rights as well as their political freedoms. I think
sanctions on the regime, not the people. You can,
the people are complaining because they're suffering.
One of the potential things we might see here is some kind of reform to the Iran deal. President Macron of France has suggested on ballistic missiles, probably because of North Korea, he might be amenable to working with President Trump. But I wonder whether we might also see some kind of crackdown in terms of where a lot of these economic deals from Europe are going, because a lot of them at the moment are going to the Revolutionary Guard fronts, which is, of course, one of the gripes it seems to be of the Iranian people. Anyway, we will be right back with predictions.
I want to make cars fly. I love turning old stuff into something amazing. I want to plant a garden for the whole world.
We grow up, but we never stop dreaming. Here at Coke, we challenge ourselves and the status quo to produce innovations like renewable fuel, more energy-efficient vehicles, and food for all. Because what drives us most is challenge itself.
When I was a freshman in college, I lost my brother Brian to suicide. Brian had been a very successful college student himself who was president of an a cappella group, sports editor of a newspaper, 3.8 GPA at an Ivy League university. And what we learned is that he started experiencing some pretty severe mental health issues in his freshman year of college. He started experiencing depression and hearing voices, some psychosis, and yet he hid it. He hid it from me. He hid it from his friends. He hid it from all of his teachers because he was scared. He was ashamed. He didn't know what this meant. He thought he was the only one who was struggling, and he thought it was his fault. Brian eventually went and sought help in his senior year. The hopelessness and the helplessness that accompanies depression had gotten to him, and had gotten to him so strong that just about a year later, in my freshman year of college, Brian died by suicide.
When I grow up, I want to make cars fly, soaring through the air like a rocket.
We all grow up, but you might say my head's still in the clouds. Because at Coke, my team and I dream up new technologies to make cars more aerodynamic, which improves fuel economy. It's a challenge, but this is what I was born to do.
Predictions, Pat.
The Steele dossier and the manner in which it was put together by the FBI will contaminate and compromise the Mueller investigation.
The next big turn of the screw in the Russian investigation will be revelations from the Deutsche Bank records and the intermingling of Trump loans and Russian money laundering.
That's a good one. Evan?
There will be further indictments from the investigation, as there will be additional antagonism from Trump loyalists in Congress against the Department of Justice.
Clarence?
I predict great success for Tom Rogan as the host of the McLaughlin Group. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, my friend. That is very kind of you. Okay, well, so for me, I'm going to give you a random fact. 408 years ago today, Galileo discovered the 3 moons of Jupiter, Io, Ganymede, and Europa. In 2015, NASA announced that Ganymede has a vast internal ocean. Anyway, thank you, panelists, very much for a civil and stimulating discussion with ardent passion. And thank you for watching. We will be back next week, and we hope you'll join us then. But until then, make sure to follow us on Twitter at McLaughlin Group, and please visit our website, www.mclaughlin.com. Thank you.